Hello, everybody, and welcome to another installment of Not Your Professor. Today we will be reviewing enzymes again, part 2, and I'm going to keep it real with you, Chief. This is not going to be a cakewalk compared to last week. I'm not saying that it's impossible, but it's going to take a wee bit more effort on your part if you do happen to care about graduating. If graphs aren't your forte, then you might need a little absinthe to get through this one. Enzyme kinetics is quite the wild ride. The main thing to recognize is that the concentration of enzymes in product generally greatly influence the rate of the reaction. Picture a bar with all dudes. Now, as one woman walks in, some of the dudes will start to flock over to her, try to shoot their proverbial shot. As more and more women begin to walk in, more and more men become preoccupied with women until the bar reaches a point where each man is talking to a woman. Yes, I am aware that most men are creeps and that this is a completely unrealistic scenario. But, just for the sake of argument, we're going to use it. Now, switch to men with enzymes and the girls with substrates, or the other way around for any of you snowflakes that might be offended by that. The rate in the beginning of woman to men pairing up is increased as more and more women match up with more and more men. As the ratio begins to get to 1 to 1, the men take a little longer to find a woman who is not already preoccupied. This is what we call the saturation point. It is the point where an enzyme reaches maximum velocity, and the only way to increase this rate is to increase the amount of enzyme. This interaction between enzymes and substrates is described in the Michelson-Menten equation, named after the people that created it. And honestly, can you blame them? Look at the shit you put your name on. Now you're the one that has to know their names, so fuck you. Dumbing it down for you, because that's how we do it around here, this equation allows you to find V, or enzyme velocity, at a given point, likely for the amount of given substrate. The equation is velocity equals maximum velocity times substrate concentration divided by Km plus substrate concentration. Now, Km is simply put the substrate concentration at which half of the enzyme's active sites are full. From the plot, you can see that when substrate concentration is less than Km, changes in substrate concentration will greatly affect the reaction rate. I bet a lot of you motherfuckers thought that was going to be it for graphing. Well, keep on crying, pussy, because there is one more that you for sure need to know. The second are the Lineweaver-Burke plots, which are, everybody take a deep breath, double reciprocal graphs of the Michelson-Menten plots. Now, that is a lot to digest, but don't worry about that for now. The gist of it is that the x-intercept is equal to -1 over km, and the y-intercept is equal to 1 over Vmax. This graph will be especially crucial when it comes to inhibition, so don't forget about it for now. As we know, enzymes are proteins that act as biological catalysts, increasing the speed of many reactions within the body. Enzyme function throughout the body is a highly regulated process, as products further down the metabolic pathway regulate the function of enzymes earlier on in the process, in a process called feedback regulation. For my economics people, think of supply and demand. Let's use, say, tequila, because I'm sure many of you have had that ingrained in your heads after a rough night out. If a company is consistently producing tequila and the demand falls, the company will start to produce less tequila until the demand increases. In the same way, if enzyme is creating products in the body, meeting its necessary amount, that product will essentially regulate the function of the enzymes, telling it to stop making that product at the time. This is called feedback inhibition. Not too complicated, but just like with a cuckold husband, there tends to be an elephant cock in the room. Less often, enzymes can exhibit feed-forward regulation, where an enzyme is regulated by a product that precedes it. It is complicated, and I love metaphors, so let's try one. Feed-forward regulation is like jerking off before you have sex. It precedes a sexual encounter, and prevents busting a nut in 2 minutes or less. Maybe not my best example. Sorry, ladies. But the point is, products earlier in a metabolic pathway regulate the enzymes further down. There are 4 main types of enzyme inhibition that you're going to need to know, but I'm going to try to be as succinct in describing them as possible, so your head just doesn't spontaneously explode. The Lineweaver-Burke plots, believe it or not, are pretty good at distinguishing between the two, so you're going to want to watch those harder than a risky text sent to the hot girl down the road. Competitive inhibition is as simple as an inhibitor binding to enzymes, not allowing them to bind to the substrate's active site. It's a basic case of enzyme cock blocking, basically. This is overcome by adding more substrate so that it can outcompete the inhibitor. It does not affect the Vmax number, but, however, it does increase the Km value. In non-competitive inhibition, inhibitors bind to an allosteric site, changing the enzyme's conformation. This type of inhibition cannot be overcome by adding more substrate because the enzyme is ineffective regardless. This type of inhibition decreases the Vmax value, but does not affect the Km because the enzymes that are not inhibited have the same affinity for substrate. I included in this one mixed inhibition as well, and it's exactly what it sounds like. An inhibitor can bind to either the enzyme or the enzyme-substrate complex. Clearly they did not think out of the box on these names, but fuck it, they had bigger fish to fry. It binds on an allosteric site and can either increase or decrease the Km value. Increase if it prefers the enzyme, decrease if it prefers the enzyme-substrate complex, but Vmax decreases regardless. Lastly is uncompetitive inhibition. This is when the inhibitor binds to the enzyme-substrate complex, locking them into place so that they cannot be released. Like a pregnancy between two incompatible people together, this causes an increased affinity between the two. If they're already bound, then they have to bind to an allosteric site. You fucking dimwit. They lower both Km and Vmax. Now, this is just a little chart I found online that's pretty helpful in distinguishing between at least competitive, non-competitive, and uncompetitive inhibition. To be honest, you're probably going to want to just memorize this shit because it's going to come up and you're going to freak out and not know what the fuck to do. So this chart will be your best bet at getting that answer right on your quiz or exam. Well, that does it for another installment of Not Your Professor. Next week we will be talking about, I have no idea what the fuck we're going to be talking about next week. Something biology, science related, so come back if you want to see more. As always, like and subscribe and feel free to roast me in the comments. See y'all next week.